Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back by Brian Daley, based on characters and situations created by George Lucas. Episode 1, Freedom's Winter.
Woo! Okay, a little loud. Hi everybody, welcome to a special, bizarre EU review presentation. This is what I'd like to call a video showcase. A chance to show you some oddball items in the Star Wars collection you might actually be interested in purchasing in visual format, rather than doing it straight as audio or in text form as we see on my blog at eucantinablogs.net/NathanPButler. Of course, the EU review itself can be discovered on solosound.net if you haven't already. This, of course, is coming to you via the EU Review's Facebook page. Now, you may have noticed we started out with a little bit of a visitor here. This bear, this little teddy bear, is one that I was given on the day I was born. Literally, the day I was born, October 17, 1979, same day the U.S. Department of Education was founded. That's what makes it notable, not my birth. But 30-some-odd years ago now, when I was born, I was given this bear. And around the time that I was little enough to wear the shirt this bear is wearing, you notice the Wicket the Ewok Star Wars Return of the Jedi underoos that this bear has been wearing in my closet for many, many, many years until I dug him out today. Way back when I could actually wear this shirt, and I'm a tiny bit larger than that now, not by much. Way back then, there was a very unique form of Star Wars production that was coming out. And the audio you just heard in that low volume there was the opening of the first episode of what is one of my most memorable young experiences with Star Wars. The first episode of The Empire Strikes Back radio drama presented on NPR and written by Brian Daley. One of the things we're going to look at this time, of course, are those radio dramas. In fact, that is our focus, but we're going to narrow it down as we go along here. First off, when we start talking about the idea of the Star Wars classic trilogy and how you might experience it, back in the EU Review, episode 4.5, I showed you, or told you about, some of the novelizations. We went through them bit by bit, and 3 of the 7 novelizations that were discussed were the classic trilogy novelizations. I want to show you those briefly. If you are someone who collects things in omnibus form, then maybe the one that you've got sitting around is this one. This is how a lot of people of my generation experienced the Star Wars novels. They were a little young when the first ones came out, so they didn't buy them as novels individually, but when eventually Del Rey produced the first omnibus edition of them, they picked this one up. This is, of course, my copy that, if you've looked on the blog, is signed here by Alan Dean Foster, if I can get it to show up correctly there for you. So maybe one of the ways you experience a classic trilogy is like this, in omnibus form. Maybe you picked up the individual books, and I wanted to point out what I pointed out on that episode, except do it visually this time very quickly. If you picked up the A New Hope novelization, ghost-written by Alan Dean Foster but credited to George Lucas, this is what the first edition paperback actually looks like. It's that purple McQuarrie concept art, basically, that poster art there. This was produced in 1976, before the film actually reached theaters. If you're looking for the first edition hardback, your best bet is to go for the book club edition because it was released at first in paperback form, and that book club edition is going to look like this. Hopefully not nearly as beat up as my copy is, but it's going to look like this. This is my copy signed by Anthony Forrest, who played Fixer, and the unnamed sand trooper who says, move along after being mind-tricked. Perhaps in 1980, when The Empire Strikes Back came around, maybe you picked up the novelization of that. This is what the first edition novelization of The Empire Strikes Back looks like. If you're looking for it in hardback, the first hardback edition was a book club edition, and again, it looks pretty much the same, in this case just in hardback with a dust jacket. Again, hopefully maybe yours looks a little bit better than mine does. Same thing happened in 1983. If you were to pick up Return of the Jedi, you would have picked up the Return of the Jedi paperback if you were looking for it in first printing again, or first release format again. Has some nifty little pictures and such inside it. Or you could have picked up the book club edition, which was the first time it appeared in hardback. Same general cover, again, Sci-Fi Book Club edition. We talked about those back in episode 4.5, and one of the things that you're going to hear or have heard recently as of the time that this is being released on the EU Review would have been the EU Review, The Obscure Side, number 4. Number 4 is all about the Marvel oddball reprints, including, most specifically, the a long time ago omnibus, trade paperback, and prestige format editions. However, mentioned in there is also a quick listing of the different Marvel printings of comic adaptations of the film. So maybe one of the ways you've experienced the classic trilogy is with comic books. Perhaps you experienced it with the original issues 1 through 6 of the Marvel Comics. Issues 1 through 6 make up the adaptation of A New Hope, part of the regular Marvel 107-issue run there. Maybe, when The Empire Strikes Back came around, you kept up with the Marvel series at that point as well. Again, a 6-issue adaptation here from the Marvel series, issues 39 through 44. Again, part of the regular 107-issue run. Eventually, and this was actually some of my first Star Wars comics ever, though I've repurchased them to get better copies. Around 1983, you had the release of Return of the Jedi in theaters, and with it comes the Marvel Comics adaptation. Notice it's only 4 issues this time. Apparently, Return of the Jedi didn't warrant the same number of issues that the previous 2 films had. Probably because it's mostly an action film compared to something that has a lot more character development like we see in, say, The Empire Strikes Back. So maybe your experience with the classic trilogy has been through comic form. Or maybe, while the Return of the Jedi and the Empire Strikes Back comic adaptations have been reprinted over and over and over and over and over again, never really changing, except being printed on perhaps better paper by Dark Horse Comics and such, and relabeled as classic Star Wars Return of the Jedi and so forth, maybe your first experience with a comic adaptation of A New Hope was not to check out the original version that has so many oddball errors that we think of as errors today, things that were odd because of when it was being produced. Maybe you picked up that reboot, or not reboot, but redone adaptation by, I believe it was Bruce Jones, which was released by Dark Horse Comics, the 4-issue miniseries simply entitled Star Wars, which of course is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. More than likely, though, if you're experiencing the Star Wars films, especially the classic trilogy, it was on film. That was the best way to experience them, of course, in the way that Lucas envisioned. Perhaps in that case, you were like me, and your first way of experiencing it was on the original VHS release. Eventually, the first time they ever bothered to put these things in widescreen release, this is what you had to buy to get it. Lucasfilm Company store, Star Wars Trilogy, it's got the holographic cover. Inside you have a little listing of what's in it. You have a certificate of authenticity, basically, a little message from George Lucas type of item there. A pared-down Star Wars-only version of George Lucas, The Creative Impulse. And you had the VHS copies of A New Hope, Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, of course not in that order, From Star Wars to Jedi, The Making of a Saga, that's special. But you notice that at that point, all of these special letterbox collector's editions had it marked up there on the top. Suffice to say, though, many of us, myself included, we grew up with the Star Wars trilogy on VHS, not necessarily in theaters. Many of us were a little young for that or only saw a few of them in theaters. But our main way of experiencing the Star Wars films tended to be on home video for many years. Then, of course, came George Lucas's effort to make it look better, not as a special edition, but with THX remastering. At which point we got this set, although most of them were released as a small VHS cases. This is the widescreen edition. Again, though, we have those classic films with covers like the Vader cover. You had a Vader cover, a Stormtrooper cover, and a Yoda cover for the 3 films in that case. Nothing really special added into it. But for that generation sort of caught between the original releases and the special editions, it was probably the THX remastered edition that you would have watched when you were younger. Then, of course, George Lucas decided to create his special editions, which of course had all those many, many changes, were released in theaters all over again, with changes to all 3 films, even though originally it was only A New Hope that was announced as getting a special edition. Of course, they had their new cover art, and it was either silver or gold on home video. Oddly enough, the better edition, the widescreen edition, where you get to see the whole picture, was in silver, whereas full screen was in gold. Don't ask me why. You would think it would be the other way around if silver and gold are connotations for second place and first place, respectively. Eventually, though, of course, George Lucas decided to put out the films on DVD. And we've had a chance to buy these a few times on DVD. The original DVD release being this one. Again, silver for the widescreen release here. And in this case, you had the 3 films, but also the bonus disc, including Empire of Dreams, which is an excellent documentary. And if you're going to buy the classic trilogy as a slipcase set, I would recommend those. You won't get the original editions, or whatever they're calling them at this point, the unaltered, supposedly, editions, but at least you'll get Empire of Dreams. And, of course, eventually, in the end, we got those with the original editions. And maybe saying, what the heck is he holding here? This is a collectible tin that was released exclusively through Best Buy. But all it is just a tin, and inside the tin are the films. Okay, this was back when they released the 2-disc sets, where you would have the DVD edition of the film that usually had some corrections from even the special edition, and the so-called original unaltered edition of each film. But of course, remember, those unaltered editions, even if they're calling them original editions, are for the most part remastered, or mastered from, I guess is the way to phrase it. They're mastered from the letterboxed, see, I'm getting tongue-tied, the letterboxed special or collector's edition laser discs. So they're not really based off the film print. I mean, they're as close as you can get to. It's as close as we're ever probably going to see, but not exactly what it's made out to be in some respects. So, more than likely, okay, you experience Star Wars through one of those 3 predominant ways. Either through film, probably home video mostly, or through comics, or through novels. But there is another way to experience the classic trilogy. It's probably the least experienced out there as far as the number of people who have actually partaken of it. It turns out to be one of the better ways to experience the classic trilogy in really an eye-opening fashion, a way that brings in new scenes, some great voice acting, and really an immersive experience for those who are into audio. And of course, if you're watching this, if you're listening to the EU review, obviously you're into Star Wars fan audio, or at least Star Wars podcasting, so maybe Star Wars audio is something you might want to look into for the classic trilogy.